Welcome to Post Games, a podcast about why and how we love video games. I am your host, Chris Plant, and I am so happy to have you here for an episode that's just a bit more relaxed. We've been doing some big episodes over the past few weeks, and today I just want to talk about something that I find interesting and a little bit weird. Critics of the Nintendo Switch 2, they tend to fret over Nintendo resting on the boring and the safe. They see in this year-old hardware a company following up a groundbreaking hybrid handheld and home console with, well, more of the same. Of course, more of the same is what big video game companies tend to do, but not Nintendo. Nintendo, at its best, has the capacity to be unabashedly weird. It has sold novelty controllers made from flaps of cardboard, created a talking flower that will tell you the time intentionally incorrectly. It pitched the world on motion-controlled bowling in a dual-screen touchscreen handheld when such things were seen as silly, childish, and, yes, weird. Weird starts as a negative for Nintendo, then stores can't keep the latest product on shelves, and suddenly weird is the highest of praise, the secret sauce, the superpower. The Switch 2, however, it was never weird. It was a presumed hit from the beginning. The name itself proudly proclaims this is a sequel, an update, an echo. So, in that way, the critics are undeniably correct. And yet, when I look at the games available on the Switch 2, I see a lot of weirdness. From Tomodachi Life, a life sim that lets you play matchmaker between Peter Griffin and a sentient shoebox, or Pokemon Pokopia, a Pokemon game set in a world without humans, or the upcoming Rhythm Heaven Groove, the first entry in the Rhythm Heaven series in 11 years, which promises to let you compete with friends in plucking chin hairs from an anthropomorphic onion. Has Nintendo's weirdness been hidden in plain sight? Are these games merely the weird final gasps of an earlier, stranger era? I don't have a clear answer, but I can give you the context to help you come to your own. And that is learning what the hell weird Nintendo actually is. So, I called the one person I was certain could help me out. The beloved game historian, documentarian, and podcast host, Jeremy Parrish. He provided me not one answer, but 10. This week on Post Games, the 10 great works of Weird Nintendo. Act 1, Defining Weird Nintendo. Act 2, Weird Nintendo, numbers 10 through 6. Act 3, Weird Nintendo, numbers 5 through 1. And a Patreon bonus, the best Nintendo story I can never tell you. Unless I kinda can. Mysterious, I know, you're gonna want to hear it to check it out. You'll notice no news of the week this week. That is because this is a long conversation about something very, very strange. So, let's get to it. Elevate your gaming performance with Alienware Days of Deals, happening now and bringing you tremendous savings on the gear you need to game. Buy any Alienware PC and get 50% off on the AW2725QF gaming monitor. That is a final price of $249.99. Take your gameplay to the next level with the Area 51 desktop, Alienware Aurora 16 laptop, and the Alienware 15. These gaming laptops feature Intel Core Ultra processors to deliver serious speed, fluid graphics, and total reliability. Whether you play competitively or just want the best visuals, these systems give you the advantage. You can also find great offers on displays, keyboards, and mice to complete your setup. Do not miss this chance to upgrade your gaming experience for less. Head over to alienware.com/deals today and claim your gear before these offers end on June 28th. Upgrade your game at alienware.com/deals. As a video game journalist who has been doxxed, I am constantly preaching the message of personal data hygiene. Every person, not just journalists, should be aware of how much of their personal information, phone numbers, addresses, health information, and more is available on the internet, and that those private details are being sold without your consent by data brokers and can be used for scams, harassment, and other illegal activities. The problem is so big and so widespread that you could lose entire days to finding who has your info, requesting that they remove it, and keeping these bad parties accountable. That is why I recommend Incogni. The moment you subscribe and authorize removal, Incogni begins searching data brokers, online directories, people databases, and commercial databases. You get to watch it happen in real time on the dashboard. When I signed up, over 200 removal requests were sent instantly. Within 30 minutes, 60 requests have been completed. That's not just a number. I can see the actual list of data brokers that have been contacted and begun the data removal process. Because, my friends, trust is good, but when it comes to safety, I want to see those results. But Incogni's work doesn't end there. It keeps checking back in with data brokers because with new personal data hacks, your info can begin to crop up in some of those old, gnarly places. And if you find your info somewhere, you can even send them a link and they'll work to get it removed. After going independent, I began searching for the right data personal removal service. Incogni is exactly what I was looking for and has already brought me tremendous peace of mind. To get an exclusive 60% off an annual Incogni plan, go to incogni.com/postgames or click the link in the episode description box. That's incogni.com/postgames. Act 1. Defining Weird Nintendo. Jeremy Parish is a pioneer of writing, thinking, and talking about retro games. 20 years ago, he co-created the retro gaming podcast Retronauts. It continues to this day. About 12 years ago, he began the video retrospective series VideoWorks. Sub-series like NES Works and Seigaiden document the complete software history of classic consoles chronologically, game by game. In recent years, Parish has preserved the Works series in a less precarious form of beautiful books, a few of which have permanent residence on my family's living room table. Limited Run Games has published collections of VideoWorks essays for NES Works, Seigaiden, Super NES Works, and even Virtual Boy Works. That's right, if you have suddenly become a big Virtual Boy fan thanks to Nintendo Switch Online, Parish has you covered. Parish knows more about the history of Nintendo than perhaps I know about myself, which is why I feel a little silly using that knowledge to talk about the company's oft-forgotten oddballs. We'll start with figuring out what Weird Nintendo is, especially in the context of the now, and then we'll get to the top 10 Weird Nintendo games. To start things off, I think we have to get into the semantics. We have to figure out the definition of Weird Nintendo. How would you differentiate normal Nintendo and Weird Nintendo?
I feel like Weird Nintendo is a matter of perspective. I feel like for some people, the weird stuff is actually pretty normal. But let's say kind of like the mainstream view. I think Weird Nintendo is when they do stuff and you kind of look at it and you're like, oh, that was Nintendo? How bizarre. It's hard for me to really kind of pin that down. I feel like it's, like art or pornography. You can't define it, but you know it when you see it.
Well, here's the thorny question, because I do think this is different. There is this history of Westerners talking about, quote, weird Japanese culture. And I think that and the idea of Weird Nintendo are very different things. And I was curious if you could put words to why that is.
So I think that what we're talking about here really is maybe weird from a business perspective, from the sense of what's going to make money. And Nintendo does a lot of things where you're like, oh, that's weird. And then all of a sudden they walk away from it with handfuls of cash. And you say, oh, I guess they knew what they were doing. Yeah, the weird Japan thing, I feel like we don't see that as much anymore as we used to. But I actually recently wrote about this in a book that PlayStation book that I put together. There was a real trend, like the late '90s, early 2000s into the 2010s, where as blogs and the internet kind of became more common and the boundaries between countries sort of broke down, Americans would look at things from Japan and be like, oh, that's so weird. And there was a lot of kind of not xenophobia so much, but definitely a little bit of an unintentional racist element to it. I don't think people necessarily meant anything bad in most cases. They were just like, oh, that's so weird. Japan is so weird. When it's just like, here is an interpretation of like the result of centuries of a culture that was often separate from the rest of the world. And then it opened up and it saw the rest of the world and said, oh, there's some really cool stuff out there. Let's bring that here, but let's make it palatable to our own tastes and, make it fit with our traditions. And so you get weird things that are actually, if you come at it from the Japanese perspective, it just makes sense. It's just like, that's just how you approach things.
The point about Nintendo being weird because how could it possibly make money feels like you've unlocked a little piece of my soul. Because when you hear weird Nintendo, and we're going to talk about all of these games, we're going to talk about the Tomodachi Lives or the Electroplankton, the tendency, and I think rightly, is to think of them as art. Because they are so strange. They are almost antithetical, it would seem, to commerce. But you're right. The one thing that is unifying about them is, here is a company that makes toys and makes lots of money. How the hell did this get through the system?
Well, I think you nailed it right there. Nintendo is, and always has been, primarily a toy company. That's where they landed their first hits. The big things that actually made money for Nintendo and made them more than just like this little family manufacturing company that made playing cards was things like Ultra Hand and, like the Light Sin Kosenju series of like devices where you could talk to someone with a megaphone that actually transmitted your voice through light and then a receptor interpreted it at the other end. They just created all these interesting and innovative uses of technology but applied it to play. And that fundamental concept, that ethos, no matter how big Nintendo has gotten, no matter how corporate they've gotten, I feel like there is still that piece of their soul that carries through. And, you see people get really angry at Nintendo for lawsuits and crushing fan works and things like that. And I get it. I also get why they have to protect their properties and copyrights and trademarks. But ultimately, there is like this kind of fundamental question of, is it fun, that guides Nintendo? And a lot of times they create things that are very out of step with the rest of the video games industry, because all the companies that make video games now, especially on the console front, the hardware front, they're tech companies. Sony got its start making radios. Microsoft got its start making operating systems for computers. Valve was people modding Quake engines and things like that. So they are really tech focused. Nintendo deals with tech, but it's kind of a means to an end. To like, these are the tools and the elements that are available for us to make toys that will reach a lot of people and make a lot of money. And that still really fundamentally guides their, I would say, their business and their game design philosophy. They don't always make things that are fun. Sometimes they miss the mark. I'm sure you remember we were just kind of celebrating the anniversary of this recently, or maybe not celebrating, but Wii Music. That was, I think they really thought that was going to be the next Wii Sports and the Wii Fit balance board. And everyone just looked at it and said, I'm just going to go with Rock Band. That sounds better. So they don't always get it right. But for the most part, it's really about what is a fun experience. What is a way to create not even to create fun, but to give people the tools to create fun. Something like Mario Maker.
You very early on said weird Nintendo is in the eye of the beholder, right? I know it when I see it. And then also pointed out that maybe it's that how could it have possibly ever been greenlit? It seems so catastrophically bad as a commerce proposition. And I'm realizing now, is the difference between normal Nintendo and weird Nintendo just whether or not it succeeded? Is it like a hindsight thing? Because we've been doing this for a long time. You remember when the Wii was announced. You remember the reaction. It was not glee. It was confusion. It was called Wii. There were no controllers. And yet,
I think the name Wii landed better in France than in the US.
Wii. I agree. But the Nintendo DS, there are these examples of things that seemed weird and strange and peculiar at the time. But then once they're successful, history kind of writes itself differently.
I think there is definitely something to that. But at the same time, I think you can look at Tomodachi Life and say, that just, sold 4 million copies in a weekend? Living the Dream or whatever it's called. I haven't played it yet, but all the kids I know are playing it. It's huge and it's weird, but that's the entire selling point. They basically turned weird Nintendo into a product and something that can be memeified and shared on social media, and people can be like, look at this weird stuff that's happening in my Nintendo game. It's so crazy. I'm married to like the Virtual Boy.
That point of making weird Nintendo into a product is really interesting to me, because we could have had this conversation like literally a year ago with Nintendo Switch 2 coming out. And the conversation at that time was, wow, Nintendo's playing it safe. They're making an iterative version of their old hardware. Whatever happened to weird Nintendo? The very special, weird company, it's gone. Bemoan the days of Labo. And yet, it feels like we are, in some weird ways, living in a bit of a weird Nintendo renaissance right now. Can you give contemporary examples of what they are doing that are these kind of oddities?
I mean, Tomodachi Life jumps out to me immediately. I guess Pokopia was one of those things where people looked at it and said, I don't know if I want this. But as soon as people played it, it clicked with them and they said, oh, I get it. This is Minecraft Dragon Quest Builders, but with Pokemon. That's such a good idea. Sometimes they kind of approach things from a different angle and you don't necessarily get what they're about, but then you play it. And, maybe that goes back to what you were saying about weird Nintendo being in hindsight. Something doesn't make sense until it does. And I feel like they're doing a pretty good job with that right now of taking some game concepts and putting it in front of you and you saying, huh? Oh.
Did you see the Picto Nico announcement?
No, I missed that.
So this is just today. I don't know if I'll put this in the episode or not, but they just announced an app, an iOS app, that is a game where you take photos and you manipulate them into basically WarioWare games.
See, anytime you invoke WarioWare, you're getting into weird Nintendo. And that was one of those where they weaponized it, like where they embraced the weird. And that's something that you don't see quite as much now. I think a lot of that has to do with the way the company reorganized in the early part of this century, like 20 years ago. They got rid of some of the older divisions, specifically R&D 1, which is where all that weirdness, the Wario stuff, just bubbled up. Things like the Game Boy camera. That was a huge success, but it's still really weird if you play the games in it, and like just the animations and stuff, and every once in a while you'll just get this jump scare image out of nowhere. It's weird, but that didn't stop it from selling 10 million units or whatever. So they are not as maybe openly weird the way that they were in the R&D 1 days, but that still survives. And if you're doing WarioWare stuff, then that's the legacy right there. The weird Nintendo legacy.
We will be getting to WarioWare and the Game Boy camera and many others in just a moment. But before we take a break, why do you think series like Tomodachi Life and Rhythm Heaven are coming back now after all these years?
I feel like Nintendo just cycles through concepts. There are some things where they iterate quickly, like the Splatoon games. That was kind of weird when they first announced it. Does anyone really want to play a neon-colored shooter where you jump into your puddles? That's bizarre. But then it was a big hit, and so they quickly made Splatoon 2 and 3. But a lot of times they'll put an idea out there, and Nintendo doesn't really do like the put it on sale, then discount it and clear it out 6 months later. If they have something that's successful, their games, I think because they reach such a wide audience, they have appeal and really a long tail that survives a lot more than just about any other game developer or publisher's software, because there are always these casual light gamers coming into the ecosystem of a system. Like there are still kids out there who are just now getting their first Switch. So they can afford to keep games in circulation longer, which means they don't need to iterate as quickly. There was the news story a few weeks ago about how the creators of Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest are finding that younger generations don't care about their series because it's like a decade between sequels now. They have the spin-offs, but Dragon Quest XI, that's 10 years old. Final Fantasy 16 was several years ago, and that took a decade from Final Fantasy 15. And it's losing out on that sort of young audience and bringing them in the way the games did when they were released once every year, every other year. But it works differently for Nintendo because Nintendo does have that sort of evergreen style. They're not technologically dependent. A lot of their games are not necessarily story focused, so they lend themselves to replay. I mean, Animal Crossing is getting a huge new update, and that's 6 years old now for the most recent one. They can keep these games alive longer and they continue selling. So I don't think they've needed a new Tomodachi Life or a new Rhythm Heaven until now. But, last year we had our Mario Kart and we had our Mario game and a Donkey Kong game, and Zelda was just a couple of years ago. Pokemon, that's every other year or so now. So we got those out of the cycle, and now it's time to move on to, hey, here's some of the weirder stuff. And they're still selling Mario Kart World. They're still selling DK Bonanza. But in addition to those games continuing to be strong, sort of long tail sellers, they can also introduce this other stuff that's going to appeal to people who have been playing those games and are ready for something new, but also to sort of the newcomers who are coming into the ecosystem and are looking for something that isn't necessarily a AAA blockbuster type title, not necessarily an action game like Donkey Kong. And hey, there's Tomodachi Life. Hey, there's Pokopia. We can do something that's different and is just going to let us exist in this space and enjoy. And I think Nintendo has a pretty clear sense of adoption patterns and cycles for their hardware. And everything's a little unpredictable in the tech world and the gaming world these days with prices and allocations and things like that. But I think Nintendo has a lot of data guiding their weird decisions. So they're not actually weird. It's just they're approaching the business a little differently than Microsoft and Sony. And so they do things that seem skewed, but then they pay off really well. I'm sure Microsoft would love to have a game that sold as well as Tomodachi Life. That would be amazing.
And cost a fraction of an Xbox game. I
mean, Pragmata was considered a pretty big hit for selling 2 million units, and that cost a whole lot more than Tomodachi Life to create. Capcom, I'm sure, would love to be able to put out like a simplistic looking Pragmata and sell twice as many copies, but that's just, Nintendo has figured it out, and that can always go away. They don't always get it right, and trends and tastes change, but for the moment, I do feel like they have a pretty good lock on how they should approach their development and publishing cycles.
I think their ability to not get it right and the freedom to not get it right is honestly part of the success too, which will take us to the 10 examples, because there are a few hits here and there are a whole lot of misses.
Yeah, I think Nintendo has a pretty good track record of not just sacking people after a development cycle ends, keeping that talent on staff. And even when something doesn't necessarily hit, they don't kill that team. They're not like, okay, you blew it, goodbye forever. They keep those people around and say, well, what did you learn? And generally, the people who worked on those flops, I feel, look at what went wrong and say, well, okay, now we know what not to do. Now we have a sense of what the market will bear and what works and what doesn't. So let's get it right this time. And I feel like more often than not, they pull it off.
Summer always changes how I get dressed. I want pieces that feel lighter and more breathable, things that are easy but still put together. That's why I keep coming back to Quince. They focus on high-quality essentials that feel and look amazing. Think breathable linen and soft organic cotton, well-made basics but without the luxury markup. It's that rare balance where everything feels elevated but still, effortless. Quince European linen pants and shirts are the perfect warm weather upgrade to add to your rotation, starting at just $34. Their tees are soft and easy to wear, and their lightweight cotton sweaters are perfect for cooler summer nights. Everything at Quince is priced 50 to 80% less than similar brands. They work directly with ethical factories and cut out the middlemen, so you're paying for quality, not brand markup. Quince goes way beyond clothing, custom, upholstered sofas, ceramic cookware, premium bedding. It is the kind of brand you end up recommending to everyone for everything. Now, what am I using this summer? I am sticking with that 100% European linen, relaxed short sleeve shirt. I have been terrible about dressing like a grown-up for too long, and this is the simplest, cleanest, freshest way to get it done. No more just living exclusively in graphic tee world. I have upgraded, my friends, and I think that you'll want to do the same. Elevate your summer wardrobe. Go to quince.com/postgames for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. Now available in Canada too. That is QUINCE.com/postgames for free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/postgames. I love to make this show for you. In fact, I might like it too much because sometimes the clock hits 6 p.m. and I'm like, what am I doing for dinner? I need to take care of my family. I need something delicious and healthy, and I haven't even gotten things started. For me, eating healthy, it's not a willpower problem, it's a setup problem. At least it was until I found Factor. Factor has made it so much easier to make sure that I and my family are eating well with its fully prepared meals designed by dietitians and crafted by chefs that are delivered right to your and my front door. With Factor, I am hitting my nutrition goals this season without the planning, without the grocery runs, without the cooking. And I am eating well. Most recently, I have had the fajita spiced shrimp and filet mignon, the pepper fondue shredded chicken, just some delicious stuff. Factor has meals built around your goals, whether that is weight loss, overall nutrition, more protein, or GLP-1 support. For strength and workout recovery, check out Factor's Muscle Pro collection. Factor's food is fresh, never frozen, over 100 rotating weekly meals, including globally inspired flavors like Mediterranean and Asian, so there's always something new to look forward to. It's ready in 2 minutes. Factor shops, preps, cooks, and delivers straight to your door, so you have more time for everything you love this spring, and I have more time to make you this show, and also to spend time with my family, which I love y'all, but I love them the most. I enjoy Factor, I enjoy that it tastes good, and I think that you will too. Head to factormeals.com/postgames50 off and use code postgames50 off to get 50% off and free daily greens per box with new subscription only while supplies last until September 27th, 2026. Act 2, Weird Nintendo, numbers 10 through 6. I asked you to share a list of your favorite examples of Weird Nintendo, and then you gave me a lot of options. I narrowed it down to a top 10. This is my personal top 10. This isn't definitive. But I want to go in order, and to set up number 10, I would love for you to tell folks about who I personally see as the patron saint of Weird Nintendo, and that is Gunpei Yokoi.
Yeah, I mentioned Ultra Hand earlier and the Light Kosenju series, just these interesting inventions that weren't video games. They predated Nintendo's video games. Most of those were the brainchildren of Gunpei Yokoi, who, legend has it, started at the company working in their manufacturing facilities, and just there was a lot of downtime between runs, so he would tinker with stuff that he found laying around and invented this little kind of like accordion hand thing that he could use to expand and contract and grab stuff. And somehow or another, supposedly Nintendo president Hiroshi Yamauchi caught wind of this or spotted it and said, this should be a product. And it was a massive hit, just a fun, goofy thing for kids to play with. It actually had practical applications too. And it really sort of started Nintendo on the road to success. And he continued inventing those things, but, as the company started to tinker in video games with a different division, he got pulled into that too. And he was heavily involved as the head of their first research and development division, kind of like the senior guy there. He got involved in a lot of the video game design and had a hand in things like Donkey Kong and Mario Brothers. I don't know how much of a hand, but he was involved. And he was involved very heavily in the design of the Game & Watch handheld systems, in the design of the Game Boy, and in the design of the Virtual Boy, which itself is very much Weird Nintendo. So yeah, Gunpei Yokoi, he was a pivotal figure for Nintendo, but I think the most important thing he left behind, it's been nearly 30 years since he passed, shockingly enough. I remember when that happened. It doesn't seem like it could have been that long, but I believe it was 1997 or 98. The most important thing he left behind was his philosophy of, it's sometimes translated as lateral thinking of withered technology. It's more not so much withered as just like standardized, like kind of past its prime. And the thought there is, you take a piece of technology that is not cutting edge, that has limitations, you know what the limitations are, because it's old, because there's a lot of it circulating, the manufacturing costs are low, but you can still find ways to extract fun out of that and make something good and interesting that captivates people's imagination. Game Boy is a great example of that, because when Game Boy launched, there weren't really other handheld systems in the market at the time. Atari was about to launch its Lynx, and you compare the Game Boy and Lynx, and Game Boy has this ancient Z80 processor from the 70s. It's clocked really slow. It has this tiny 4-shade of greenish gray screen with a really slow refresh rate. Very cheap, very just like, why would you play this thing when you look at it next to the Lynx, which was beefy and big and had a backlit color screen and a crazy graphics splitter that could just churn out tons of sprites at once and do amazing effects and things like that. But also, the Lynx was twice as expensive and it burned through batteries like in an hour. 6 batteries in an hour, where the Game Boy, because it was using this old technology that drew very little power, could run on 4 batteries for 20 hours. So all of a sudden, the question becomes, I want to play this system portably, and the Game Boy is smaller and a lot more portable. And also, I don't have to carry like an entire brick of batteries around with me, or carry a power adapter so that I can plug in at every opportunity to play. I can just stick the batteries in, play, and then, a day's worth of play later, oh, well, it's time to change out the batteries. Okay, no big deal. That's like $1. So yeah, that right there is Yokoi's philosophy in a nutshell, like brought to life and turned into the best-selling game system of the 20th century.
So this is perfect setup for number 10, which is the father of the Game Boy, the father of so many amazing things at Nintendo. Before all of this made a lewd video game, At number 10, it's Fascination. What the hell is Fascination?
So Fascination is basically Wild Gunman, but with nudity. And there are no gunmen, it's just women. So this was never actually released. It was a kind of an experimental project. Maybe it was just like a thing for fun. Maybe it was meant for the European market where, titillation and mores are looser than they are here in the US. But it basically used the same technology as the arcade Wild Gunman. And I'm not talking about the one that Marty McFly played at 7-Eleven. I'm talking about the original Wild Gunman, which the material for that has actually just been resurfaced and shared online. But it was a film strip that played and used a light gun. And basically you had to fire, like raise your gun and fire within a certain amount of time when a gunman drew on you. And if you pulled the trigger fast enough, then the film changed tracks and you got an animation or like real film footage of a cowboy or bandito falling over and dying. So the idea was pretty much the same with Fascination, but instead of trying to outdraw a gunman, you just shot clothes off a woman and she became increasingly nude as you fired the gun at her. It's a very strange and un-Nintendo-like creation, although legend has it that the company did invest in love hotels, like pay-by-the-hour hotels for sex, as one of their, not inventions, but their investments in the 1960s and 70s. I don't know how true that is, but that is part of the myth and legend around Nintendo. So they explored avenues. It wasn't always just for kids, but it is a funny little weird spot in Nintendo history.
At number 9, we have Nakayama Miho no Tokimeki High School. I guess the biggest question I have for you is, who designed this game?
Why, as a matter of fact, it was there was some Nintendo involvement, but it was actually the Final Fantasy guys. Hironobu Sakaguchi designed this game. Yeah, it was a collaboration, uncredited collaboration, I will say, between Nintendo and Square when Square was first getting started out. But this was Nintendo's answer to the murder mystery genre that kind of blew up with Portopia Renzoku Setsujin Jiken when that hit it big and went big on Famicom, actually. It was a computer game that got converted over to Famicom and sold a lot of cartridges. And everyone all of a sudden was making a murder mystery game. Nintendo did eventually make the Famicom Tante Club video game series, but I think they were a little reluctant to go directly into straight up murder. So before they did that, they created effectively the dating sim. So this was their swerve. They licensed the likeness and name of a popular teen idol performer at the time, actress and singer, Miho Nakayama. And this game was kind of a collaboration between Square and Nintendo and her. And you went to high school, and basically she was there as a student, but she was kind of like in disguise. Like she wasn't using her real name. She was pseudonymous.
Is it 21 Jump Street style?
Like, maybe. I think she just wanted to have a normal life and go to school, even though she was famous. But you have the opportunity to woo her and have conversation events and things like that. Very much Tokimeki Memorial, but 10 years early. Maybe not 10, but several years earlier than that. And there were, cross promotions. There were phone numbers that you got in the game, and you could call them, and she would give you encouraging messages. And if you actually managed to complete the game, then you could submit your name and address, and you would receive a special VHS tape that was basically a behind-the-scenes video. I've actually got this, and I've ripped it and put it on my YouTube channel. But it was a behind-the-scenes making a video where you're sort of going on a date with Miho, but it was, just kind of her walking around a mall and shopping and chatting with the camera, just being charming, basically. So that was like the prize for victory in this game. And I want to say that in order to win the prize, you took your Famicom Disk System diskette that had the victory conditions on it, and you took that back to the store to a reader kiosk, and it had a fax system built in. and that would transmit your information to Nintendo or whoever handled this for them, and then they would send you the prize based on that. So it made use of their disc download service that was in convenience stores in Japan, where you could download Famicom Disk System games and apparently also upload prize contest winnings. It's not really weird in the sense of, oh, that's so bizarre. It was just such an interesting sideways approach that did so many things at once. There was a lot of innovation packed into this game, and it's all kind of hinged on this minor celebrity at the time, which was still a pretty new thing. There were only a few games that tied in with the idol performers to that point.
Ahead of number 8, I want to talk about not the patron saint, but maybe the angel or devil, however you want to put it, on the shoulder of Satoru Iwata. And that is Shigesato Itoi, who is the creator of our 8th entry. Can you tell people a little bit about what makes Itoi so special? And it makes him one of the people who both is in and outside of Nintendo through all of this.
Yeah, I can't remember exactly how Itoi came into Nintendo's orbit. I want to say it was one of those cases of back in the 80s where someone who was famous played a video game and was like, whoa, this is really cool. And then he wrote to the company and the company was like, holy crap, it's a celebrity. We love this guy. Like, that's how Koichi Sugiyama got involved in Dragon Quest. He wrote to NX and was like, I love the music in this. I'd love to collaborate with you guys sometime. And they said, okay, here's a role-playing game, compose a symphony. So Itoi is a writer. I feel like it's hard to pin down exactly what kind of writer he is. He's not a journalist, really. He's not a novelist. He's more like an essayist who, I don't know who the American equivalent would be. Like maybe Dave Eggers or someone, but not quite as Gen X. He has more of like a sort of satirical, surrealist approach to his writing. And I see him listed as a commercial copywriter, but that's not really what he does. I don't know. It's like somewhere between Dave Barry and Dave Eggers, and I'm totally blanking on his name.
What has he made?
The guy who was in The Mandalorian, the
Werner Herzog?
Yes, where he just like says strange things. I can't believe I totally blanked on his name, but yeah. He like says things in such a fascinating way. I feel like Itoi is those three people combined into a novelist. And Nintendo said, would you write a video game for us?
Well, that is number 8. We have the Earthbound or Mother series. What is strange about them? Because people now, these characters show up in Smash Brothers, seems pretty familiar, but I understand at the time, in the eyes of a 90s child, there was something different about Mother or Earthbound.
This is one of those games that Americans found really weird because we didn't necessarily have the context for it. We didn't have the rich tradition of Dragon Quest clones in the US that they did in Japan. Everyone put out a Dragon Quest clone after Dragon Quest hit it big, and Nintendo was no different, but they took a different approach. Instead of making like a high fantasy, science fiction, whatever, they said, what if our game were about just kids living in the modern world, some sort of weird fantasy version of America? And what if Shigesato Itoi wrote the text and the dialogue and kind of put together the stories? So it has a lot of very surrealistic and nonsensical dialogue in it. We didn't get the original, which is now called Earthbound Beginnings for NES. That was delayed and then canceled in favor of the Super NES game. But we did get Earthbound in 1995, and it sold infamously poorly because it was just so hard to get the appeal across. But kids who did play it, generally, like, it imprinted on them. They had a lasting impression and took it with them. And it was life-changing for people like the fan gamer team. Like, they built a business around loving Earthbound. But, that game itself was strange. It had retro graphics when no one did that. It played around with the rules of role-playing, which you didn't necessarily understand. if you didn't have a rich role-playing experience. But if you had played Dragon Quest, it did a lot of things that just change the way it works. And things like you can get healing items, but the healing items are just food. And then you can also carry around, if you want to use up your inventory slots, condiments that you can apply to your food and make it tastier, which means it heals more health or whatever. So there was like this real world logic applied to the role-playing game, but it was still very much a role-playing game where you fight giant bees and spacemen. It just constantly throws you off guard, and it has bizarre music with sampling before people were doing sampling in video games that way. It has these weird strobing psychedelic backgrounds. The Mother series is just strange. It has a very off-kilter perspective visually, but also like in terms of its writing and its approach to characters. And it makes a lot of sense if you grew up in Japan playing RPGs like that, living, with an absentee father who was always at the office, and you'd call home and he'd remind you that he loves you and give you your allowance over the phone. Like all of these things, they were very much satirizing and capitalizing on the 1990s lived experience of the audience. But, we had a different lived experience here in a lot of ways. It just landed differently and became stranger than maybe it was intended to be.
Yeah, this Japanese lived experience transplanted onto middle of America. I imagine strange for both parties. I look back at these first three games, right? And I see a game that is strange because, Nintendo made a lewd, sexy game. I see one that's memorable in that it helped create the dating genre. I see Earthbound, which is memorable because I am that person, right? I forever wish I had my original strategy guide. This game had a huge impact on me. And those are all weird, big swings. And yet, at number 7, I have the game that really doesn't fit alongside everything else. And that is Metroid Prime Federation Force. I don't know if anybody has a Metroid Prime Federation Force tattoo, is what I would say.
No, probably not. Yeah, Metroid Prime Federation Force is just Nintendo really failing to read the room. Fans wanted, especially in America, really wanted a Metroid game. And we went without for so long. So Nintendo finally announces one, and it's not only a spin-off of Metroid Prime, which is a spin-off of Metroid, but it's a really weird approach to take for Metroid Prime. You play as not as Samus, not as any of the bounty hunters that she teams up with in the Prime games, but you're playing just like a generic Federation soldier, and it's a multiplayer shooter on 3DS, which kind of a rough idea right there. But yeah, you're like running around as very definitely not someone as cool as Samus without all of her powers, doing kind of menial multiplayer tasks. And it's not a bad game. It's just so misaimed and did real damage, I think, to Nintendo's brand for a little while, at least here in the States, where people were just like, these guys are so out of touch. This is not what we wanted. It also came out around the same time as Triforce Heroes, the multiplayer Zelda game, where I could never get a session to like stay connected to anyone else long enough to actually finish a quest. So they were, I think, trying to figure out how to do multiplayer, but they were stuck with 3DS and stuck with these franchises and brands that they couldn't quite figure out how to translate that into something that people wanted. So yeah, Federation Force. I mean, the final boss is Samus. That's who you're supposed to play as, not who you're supposed to fight. And she's under mind control. They did so much character assassination to Samus, who started out as the coolest Nintendo hero by far. But yeah, after Other M and Federation Force, it was just, oh man, guys, I don't like Samus anymore. What did you do?
Before we go to the final 5, I do want to talk about one other absolutely strange use of a major Nintendo IP and a beloved character in a way that I can just not imagine today. And that is at number 6, I Am a Teacher, Super Mario Sweater from 1986.
I actually can see Nintendo doing something like this because this was a really early foray into the idea of casual gaming, which is where they've found great success. And it wasn't even casual gaming. It was more like, here is a casual application for our gaming system that happens to tie in with our video game technology and our characters, but is not really gaming. This was a Famicom Disk System cartridge that taught you how to sew patterns, like sweater patterns, themed around Mario. And there was like this whole tie-in with a special, I want to say, I can't remember what brand it was, but it was like tied in with
the Japanese appliance brand Royal Industries.
That's it. Singer was later. Singer was the Game Boy Color.
Yes, this game had a sequel. Spoilers.
I briefly owned one of those Izod Singer, like iMac looking sewing machines, but I sold it. I was like, this is funny, but I have no value. Like, I have no use for this. I do not need this in my house. It's so big. But yeah, it was just like, use your disk system to very laboriously create a sweater of Mario. Okay, sure. But, they were trying. They were reaching out. They were trying to appeal to an audience and a demographic that didn't necessarily want video gaming, but might find some appeal in that application of technology.
Let's take one last break, and then we will come back and talk about a game who I have no idea who they were trying to reach out to. Act 3, Weird Nintendo numbers 5 through 1. Okay, we're back. We're here for the final 5, and we just need to get right into it. At number 5, Electroplankton. What is Electroplankton / and it's the worst question in video game discourse, but I'm going to ask it, is it a video game?
You mentioned this earlier, and I don't know if that matters. Like, it's really fun and interesting. It's just this little strange application that you could get for your DS. I think it was given a very limited release in the US. It was directed by Toshio Iwai, who was an interactive, like a media artist, a multimedia artist. So it's like Nintendo reached out to Namjoon Paik or something and were like, hey, could you make something for Nintendo DS for us? And what came back was not a video game in any real sense of the word. It's this, basically the idea is it's a zoomed in Petri dish, essentially, of little creatures, and you interact with them and you can move them around and touch different places on the screen. And they create music and create rhythms, and you're just basically creating your own sound and artsy soundscapes. And it's not structured music really in the sense of like people use Game Boy for audio sequencing. It's not like that. It's not something concrete. It's just an amusement that you can enjoy. But there is something really soothing and serene about it. It's like the Petri dish background is this deep cosmic blue trending almost to black, and the plankton themselves are very simplistic, almost just like practically geometric shapes that move around. And yeah, I don't know, like I think when this came out, it was kind of in the middle of, Nintendo was on top of things. Like the DS seemed unstoppable. So yeah, why not? Why not create this weird little artsy thing? But they put some love into it. Like it came in a special box set in Japan. And I want to say it had a special stylus with it. It's been 20 years since I owned it and played with it, but I imported it and it seemed interesting and I wrote about it, and it was just like a thing you could do with your DS, and it wasn't a video game. It wasn't structured like Animal Crossing. It wasn't structured like Brain Age. It was just like fart around on your DS. Why not? It's here. You can do stuff with it. Enjoy.
I was so puzzled by this game and in its backstory after learning more about it, basically, after you had recommended it, because I think I had a copy of it a long time ago. What I didn't know about it is the developer Indies Zero in that they have really been making Weird Nintendo for Nintendo and for a lot of other people ever since. The studio makes Electroplankton, but they also make Retro Game Challenge 1 and 2. They make NES Remix. They made those strange Theta Rhythm Final Fantasy games. It's always strange when you see something like this and the studio survived. And not only that, but has survived for a long time.
I feel like they must have been a really small company at the time, but I'm looking at them now, and they actually were the company, they started making a game that I almost put on this list, which was a downloadable game for the BSX Satellaview called Sute Hakun, which is this kind of strange puzzle platformer game. The little guy you control in the game kind of looks like a snowman, but he's actually made of water, and you move around and solve puzzles by like draining water and making yourself bigger and then putting it in other places. It's not quite weird enough to qualify as Weird Nintendo, but it is a strange little game that I feel like has a small fan base that thinks highly of it. And kind of connecting that with Electroplankton, I'm like, okay, yeah, I get it. Yeah, that makes sense. But they also did like the NES Remix games. So they do some stuff that is super commercial, like super high selling. I feel like they probably could eat off the royalties on NES Remix and its sequels for quite a while.
For number 4, I have the Pokemon Mini. And I'm very confused about this because Nintendo made a Pokemon console, a handheld console, that apparently nobody remembers. Why is it not something people are familiar with?
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like this was their attempt to jump on Tamagotchi with Pokemon, but it's not even that. It's like, basically, they had Game Boy Color, but then they were like, let's also do another handheld system that takes cartridges, but it's smaller and it's focused on Pokemon. It's like, why not just make a special Pokemon-themed Game Boy that has like a built-in Pokemon game or something? It's really bizarre. But, it also coincides with the release of the Pocket Station for PlayStation, the VMU for Dreamcast. So I think they were trying to navigate that space, but still also be Nintendo. And that means they would have their sort of pipeline of manufacturing cartridges. I just feel like it was one little system too many. Like, it was technically its own system. It had something like 8 or 9 games for it, and they all sold separately. But people already had Game Boy, and that's where the real Pokemon games were. So I just don't think there was really any appeal to the Pokemon Mini. And if it had been something different, like if they had made the Pokewalker, a decade early, that would have been great. That would have made sense. That would have fit right in with the VMU and the Pocket Station. But instead they were like, why don't we just have a game system that is in competition with Game Boy? That seems like a great idea. Why don't we do that?
I don't know if this is apocryphal, but I was trying to figure out why I hadn't even heard of it, because that seemed just strange. And apparently it was sold exclusively at the Pokemon Center in New York, beginning when that opened, which is November 16th, 2001. And I'm wondering, you sell it in one store in New York after 9/11, when people are not traveling, probably not a great way to launch your hardware.
Yeah. But they made 3 different versions of it, three color variants.
See, that undermines my entire theory right there.
So yeah, it had all kinds of stuff in it. I'm looking at the specs. It had a real-time clock. It had infrared trading. It had force feedback. It's really bizarre. I don't know what they were thinking with this, but the resolution was surprisingly high considering how tiny it is. I don't know.
Let's cleanse our palates with something that did work. At number 3, the Game Boy camera. You mentioned earlier the lateral thinking with withered technology. The Game Boy camera to me epitomizes Nintendo at its most. I have a coupon for Radio Shack. One, can you explain what the appeal of the Game Boy camera is? And two, can you give listeners an idea of just how shitty it was as a camera? Because I think now people hear it and they hear Game Boy camera, makes perfect sense as a series of words.
I mean, it was kind of shitty, but you have to bear in mind that the Game Boy camera came out in 1998. Digital cameras at the time were very expensive and actually very low powered. I spent a crazy amount of money. I don't even want to think how much on an Apple QuickTake camera in like 96, 97. That shot like 8-bit color at 640 by 480. That's like pathetically low resolution. It did not have a good light sensor. I mean, now, DSLRs shoot 4K, 8K, 10K, but at the time, no. You pay like $600 for this thing that was basically giving you an image that was barely big enough to look okay on a website. So Nintendo said, why don't we put a really, really cheap photo sensor inside a Game Boy cartridge, a really cheap lens, and make a game out of it and sell it for, I want to say $80, $90. It was very inexpensive compared to an actual digital camera. And they democratized digital photography in a way that you just couldn't get at the time. Like I said, digital camera is very expensive. A real digital camera in 98 probably would have still cost like $300 or $400. So getting in at a fraction of that cost was genius. But the actual device itself is really weird.
You said earlier, it's not just that the hardware is strange, that you have a giant camera strapped to the top of a cartridge. There are games inside that are playing with the photos.
Yeah, you can play with the photos, you can edit the photos, draw on them. The sensor gives you the ability to change the contrast and the darkness and brightness. So there are some limited options, but also just the act of interacting with the Game Boy camera. If you've played Wario Land 4, you know how you can get those music CDs in the stages as a collectible, and you take them back to the music room, you're like, oh, this is going to be great. I'm going to listen to some of these great tunes. And not a single one of those CDs has music on it. It's like audio clips, and it's people making weird noises, and it's bizarre faces doing stuff. That is the Game Boy camera interface. You turn it on, and there's this middle-aged dude who's got eyelashes drawn on him and lipstick, and he's making goofy faces at the camera. When you shoot, the shooting interface is presented like an RPG, and there's like a princess, a crudely drawn princess. Not crude in the sense of like sexual, just like very amateurishly drawn princess who's looking all teary-eyed at you as you move through the RPG menus in order to set up your shot. So they just goofed around with this whole thing. I mean, the Game Boy camera really strikes me as Nintendo, their staff, they were cooped up in the office working on projects, sleep deprived, sleeping at the office, showering at the office, living there, losing their minds a little bit. And they invested all of that into the experience of the Game Boy camera. It's just a genius piece of equipment. It sold so well. It tied in with their Game Boy printer, the little thermal printer. That was how you printed out the camera photos, and you could turn them into stickers and stuff. So there was actually kind of like a incentive to goof around and paint stuff on the photos because you could print it out and make embarrassing images of your friends and things like that. It was the idea of photography as play, which again, it was very, very uncommon because this was very, very early days of digital photography, which now, like digital photography is cheap. It's ubiquitous. And the actual photographs that you take are cheap, and you can have thousands of them. But at the time, if you were dealing with film, that was expensive. You had to buy a roll of film. You had like 24 shots. You took it to the convenience store or the pharmacy or whatever. They would develop it for you, give it back to you 2 days later. Your photos may or may not have turned out. And Game Boy camera just bypassed all of that and gave you the ability to do that kind of like simple, crude photography and be creative with it and have fun with it. for a very, very low price. And it was just, it really is one of the greatest gadgets of all time, in my opinion. But at the same time, it's really weird. I would just want to say, like, one of my pride and joys is a Game Boy camera that has an actual DSLR lens mount on it. So you can attach like I think it's a Canon mount. You can screw a Canon lens on here. And I've got one that's got pretty good telescopic function to it. And you can take amazing telephoto lenses with a Game Boy camera. I've got some vacation photos I took like right before COVID hit, standing in my hotel room, looking out a mile away at the Tokyo Tower and taking a great close-up photo of Tokyo Tower, or not close-up, but zoomed-in photo of Tokyo Tower with my Game Boy camera. It's like, I love this thing. It was custom-made, and there's a guy who will do it, probably a few guys who will do it now, but yeah, it's just such a weird, versatile little device, and it doesn't change the functionality of it at all. It just allows you to use a real lens to do quote-unquote real photography with a Game Boy camera. Doesn't change the resolution either. It's still shit resolution.
Incredible. We have two more. And Game Boy camera was for a long time at the top of the list for me, but I had to shuffle. One is maybe the epitome of the commerce thing we talked about at the top, of why would a company make this if their goal was to make money? And that is the penultimate game for the GameCube, Odama. And it is produced and designed by Seaman creator Ute Saito. Why would Nintendo be willing to fund another Ute Saito designed microphone-controlled game following Seaman?
I mean, it gives them what Nintendo does, what Sega does. It fights back against that perception. No, I think there was some prestige attached to working with Saito. He's one of those guys who just has great ideas. And I think there is a certain cred that comes with saying, Ute Saito, please do something weird for us. I feel like this was a project that maybe got started back when they still had hopes and dreams for the GameCube and thought, this will be a fun thing to release as just kind of part of our lineup. And then GameCube's life was curtailed. But I feel like if you have a project in development with Yu Saito, you don't say, oh, sorry, we got to kill this. Tough luck. Maybe better luck next time. He has that stature and that prestige where you're like, let's go ahead and see what happens. And Odama is really interesting. It's a pinball game, essentially, but it's voice controlled. And also it's kind of a strategy game where the pinball is a giant boulder that you roll around the battlefield and try to demolish enemy armies with.
In feudal Japan, naturally.
In feudal Japan, of course. I mean, where else are you going to find a giant boulder? I mean, given that it's about rolling around a ball and the name is Odama, so it's coming from the same root as Katamari Damacy. I wonder if maybe this was like, they thought, hey, that was a big, weird hit for Namco and Sony. Maybe we should do something offbeat that involves a soul ball that is very unconventional and unusual. I don't know. I can't explain Odama, but I know that I'm happy that it exists and that Nintendo said, this console is dying. It's withering. No one's buying it anymore, but God bless you. We are going to release your game and we're going to put out a microphone attachment for it.
I will also give credit to Shigeru Miyamoto on this one, in that he championed the game when people were skeptical of it, including himself at first. And when the game came out in 2006, he did press for it, which seems impossible to imagine now, a game that is doomed for him to, go out and carry water for. But he said this that I think is useful and kind of reflects a lot of what we've talked about today. Nintendo's theme for 2006 will be, quote, create new fun, and also, quote, spread the fun of games to everyone. To do this, we must return to the beginning to recapture the essence that made people who enjoy games even now enjoy them in the first place. Which is funny because he says that's our goal in 2006, and you might as well just say that's our goal.
Well, I feel like maybe people needed a reminder that that's Nintendo's thing, and maybe Nintendo needed a reminder that that's their thing. They did kind of lose their way with GameCube, which, that was them attempting to compete with the other consoles in terms of power. That had a PowerPC processor in it. It was a very capable system, and no one wanted it because there were lots of reasons, but it didn't perform. And so after that, they said, you know what? Let's go back to the Yokoi way. Let's find us some withered technology and do some lateral thinking. And then we came out, and they brought fun to everyone, including senior citizens who still loved a Wii Sports Bowl.
They still love it. Jeremy, we have reached number one, and that is the WarioWare series as a whole. You kind of spoiled it at the beginning, and I had to really bite my tongue, but you nailed it. There are a lot of WarioWare games. What do they all have in common?
Well, they've got Wario. They've got simplistic gameplay, like very pick up, play, immediately intuit, and also they're really weird. They have that element of the Game Boy camera, that interface, but blown up and spread out to just an entire franchise where every game belongs to like a subcategory that's overseen by a different character in the game and has their distinct stamp on it. And so there's different kinds of weirdness. There's Ashley's weirdness, which is spooky, and there's 9-Bit's weirdness, which is retro games. And then you have Wario's weirdness, which is just gross. And so I feel like the WarioWare series is really just Nintendo at its most purely creative. It's like every little idea that Nintendo designers have ever had for a game concept that maybe didn't work, or for a character idea or a visual design or whatever, things that just didn't quite work on their own as a full game, cram them into this collection of 100+ micro games and bombard players with them nonstop and leave them reeling with how strange and surreal it is, while also challenging them to think fast, figure out what am I supposed to do in this little event, give them 4 seconds to do it, then move on immediately to the next thing. It's just, yeah, like when the original WarioWare came out, I had no idea what to expect. I like the WarioWare games a lot. I thought Wario Land 4 was amazing. And I guess I kind of expected more of that. And I picked it up and was just like, I've never played anything like this. This is truly a one-of-a-kind game. It's so bizarre and yet it just makes so much sense. It's just so good.
There's one other reason I picked this, because you've nailed the software side of Weird Nintendo, but I think it also represents the hardware and the withered technology side too. Can you tell people the many different ways it also played that game?
Yeah, I mean, with the original WarioWare, that was a Game Boy Advance game, and people complained about Game Boy Advance not having 4 face buttons like the Super NES controller, but you play most WarioWare GBA games with a single button. You don't even need both of those buttons. It's an embarrassment of riches, really. But they followed that up with WarioWare Touched, which made use of the DS screen. Lots of games did that. But there was also WarioWare Twisted, which had an accelerometer or a gyro inside the cartridge, which they also used for Yoshi's Topsy Turvy and Kirby Tilt and Tumble and a couple of other games. But this one, all the games are controlled by moving your GBA around and rotating. And I feel like they had to redesign the Nintendo DS to the DSi just so that you could, was it that the change where you could stick the cartridge in the right way up? Because otherwise you had to play upside down. Yeah, gosh, there was WarioWare DIY, which took advantage of the DS touchscreen, not for play, but to create play. It turned it into kind of like a proto Mario Maker, where you were making micro games and assembling them together into a series of challenges. It basically taught you programming. There have been a bunch of Wario games. There was one that you could only play with other people. There was one that made use of the Wii remote. There was one that made use, it wasn't called WarioWare, but it made use of the Wii U touchpad. That it's just like anytime new technology comes around, they say, let's do a WarioWare with it. I'm sure we're going to get a WarioWare that makes use of the Switch 2's mouse component. The fact that you can use the Joy-Con 2s as a mouse, that just seems like a thing that they would be remiss in not doing.
I love it. Well, that is all 10. Is there one or two or three or however many that you want to make sure that you shout out for people who are obsessed with this stuff?
I do want to give a shout out to Nestor's Funky Bowling. So you have the Virtual Boy, which itself is Weird Nintendo, and that system is going nowhere quickly. So as a final farewell to the system, what do? You create a bowling game. Okay, I can see that. Virtual Boy, you stick your face in it. It's got like immersion. So there was a really good Virtual Boy bowling game called Virtual Bowling, released only in Japan. It's on NSO now, which is good because otherwise it's like $4,000. It was great. It's a really good bowling game made by Athena. They understood bowling. They were like, their games were so good, and Virtual Bowling is awesome. Nintendo did not release that in the US for some reason. They said, no, let's get an American developer to make a game about bowling, and it should star that guy from the Nintendo Power comics that we discontinued a year ago. Yeah, it's Nestor. It's Nestor. This ugly little guy, this horrible little dude that no one liked. We shut down his comic, but here you go, Nestor. You got a whole ass video game on this dying platform that no one wants. They even gave him a sister, Hester, and it is a really strange take on bowling because it's like, it's bowling, it's fine. But then all the interstitials are Nestor either celebrating or freaking out. He and his sister have a tendency to lose all their hair the second that they miss a ball, they get a gutter ball or something. Really weird choice. Not the best swan song for a system that I think deserves a little more love. I'm glad that, honestly, the Nintendo Switch Online cardboard Virtual Boy controller, that's Weird Nintendo, and God bless them for it.
I love it. That is perfect. Jeremy, thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I love to just wax eloquent for an hour about Nintendo whenever I'm given the chance.
I love to listen to it. It's been a real treat. Hey, before you go, where should people go if they want to check out more of your work?
If you want to see me talk a lot about Nintendo, you could check out my video series NES Works, also Virtual Boy Works and Game Boy Works, etc. on my YouTube channel. It's just my name, Jeremy Parrish. I'm right there. You can also find me doing stuff, various things at Limited Run Games. And of course, I am also co-host of the Retronauts podcast, talking about Nintendo and other old games for 20 years now.
My very first favorite podcast.
Aw, it's great.
It literally shaped me in every way, which sounded somehow a little dirtier than I wanted it to.
I didn't take it as dirty. It just feels like a lot of pressure.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
A Patreon bonus, the Nintendo story I could never tell. If you listen to the show, you know how this works. Here is where we split up. For Patreon subscribers, I have something special, interesting, a little weird. In 2018, I interviewed one of the great collectors of Nintendo memorabilia on Earth. And that recording was lost, along with my voice recorder, a week later on my return to the United States. I have recorded every interview with a primary and backup recorder ever since, and honestly, I've always been diligent about dumping recordings onto my laptop. But with all the Tokyo Game Show work I was doing alongside that interview, I don't know. I was distracted. It was a beginner's mistake, embarrassingly late in my career. I had hoped to perform the interview a second time, but my responsibilities at Polygon shifted once I took over as editor-in-chief, and I never had the opportunity again. It is a huge bummer. The interview is gone, but for the Patreon bonus, I wanted to try something a bit experimental, I guess. I'm going to tell you about that trip to Japan, and specifically my visit to the family home of Isao Yamazaki, where I saw many of the rarest and oldest Nintendo materials tucked neatly, albeit tightly, into a single simple room. For everybody else, we'll start wrapping things up. Let's split. That is a wrap on Weird Nintendo. I am certain that you have favorite Weird Nintendo games and toys of your own, and I would love for you to share them in the comments of the show notes on Patreon or the newsletter. Because the cool thing about Weird Nintendo stuff is it sticks to you in the ribs, in the heart, in the brain. You just can't get it out of your head, and you need to share it with someone. Next week, what's the point of a video game review? Who is it for? How does it work? Game reviews are the perpetual driver of video game discourse online, but outside the occasional scorching hot social media post or furiously typed manifesto, few critics have the time and space to talk at length and in depth about their craft. So, this summer, I'm hosting a series of conversations with some of the most exciting critics of video games. The first 2 episodes will air over the following 2 weeks, focusing on written criticism. Later this summer and into the fall, the series will return to hear about criticism on YouTube, podcast, and elsewhere. I think you will really, really love these conversations, so be sure to tune in. Until then, a reminder, post-game supporters get the show and the newsletter early on Fridays at 5 p.m. Eastern at the latest, usually bright and early, way before you've woken up Friday morning. They get extra acts and bonus materials. This week, Patreon listeners got a bonus section all about the Nintendo story I can never tell. It's complicated. Plus, each month, subscribers get a bonus episode in my ongoing series, Past Games, in which I share deep dive histories into the gaming anniversaries of 2026. The upcoming episode, which is just like a week away, goes into the history of the original Tomb Raider, which launched in October of 1996, and, well, it's been going ever since. And no ads on anything. Subscribe to the Patreon at patreon.com/postgames. Subscribe to the newsletter for free at post.games. Post Games logo by James Bareham, theme by Mark Sparling, and a special thank you to this week's guest, Jeremy Parrish. Like the show? Leave a review on Apple or Spotify, or share the show with a friend. All of the above are a tremendous help. And that, my friends, is it. I'll see you next week.